والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه الطاهرين ما دام ما في السماوات والأرضين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم إنا نسألك علما ينفعنا يرفعنا اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا واسعا وعملا متقبلا وشفاء من كل داء وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, we thank and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of His blessings that He has bestowed upon us, and we beseech Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in those blessings. By the grace and mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we continue our reading of Waraqat, a basic primer in terms of Islamic legal theory. In our last lesson, we had looked at certain aspects of the command verb. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us in many places in the Holy Quran, Aqimis Salah, establish the prayer. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala issues a command, then the duty bound, the morally responsible, whom we refer to in Arabic as the mukallaf, if he executes, he actions that command which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had thus issued, is he considered to be off the hook? That's the first issue that we're going to be looking at today, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The text reads as follows. وَإِذَا فَعَلَ or وَإِذَا فُعِلَ, if it is done, or if he executes the command, he actions the command, يَخْرُجُ الْمَأْمُورُ عَنِ الْأُهْدَةِ, then the duty bound is absolved of the obligation. In other words, Allah commands me to pray. The moment I pray, then I am absolved of the obligation to pray. Meaning that I do not need to wait for external evidence that now tells me you were commanded, you action the command, and now you are absolved. No, we need not wait for that particular third step. I receive the command, I action the command. The moment I action the command, you and I, we are considered absolved of the obligation, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So let's get back to the text and read through that again. وَإِذَا فَعَلَ أَوْ فُعِلَ, not too sure how to read that. وَإِذَا فَعَلَ, if the duty bound actions the command, يَخْرُجُ الْمَأْمُورُ عَنِ الْأُهْدَةِ, then he is absolved of the obligation. وَفِي نُسْخَةٍ, in another copy of the Waraqat, it reads, إِذَا فَعَلَهُ الْمَأْمُورُ, when the duty bound actions it, in other words, fulfills the command, whatever the command may be, خَرَجَ عَنِ الْعُهْدَةِ, then he is absolved, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. What we do find that in certain other texts, when it comes to Usul al-Fiqh, books on Islamic legal theory, when they discuss the same phenomenon, they discuss it using different wording. Let's look to that alternate wording now, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It reads as follows. In most books, the issue is labeled as أَنَّ الْأَمْرِ يَقْتَضِي إِجْزَاءَ الْمَأْمُورِ بِهِ. A command signifies the exoneration of the duty bound. In other words, the idea is that when the duty bound actions the command addressed to him, like in the example that we gave now, Aqimis Salah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands me to pray. Then I action the item, I actually pray. The moment I do that, then I am exonerated. And this is basically what we mean, or really what the jurist means when they employ the term ijza. So that is the first issue that we are going to be discussing today. That أن الأمر يقتضي الإجزاء. The moment you fulfill the command, then you are exonerated. Regarding this particular issue, there is a difference of opinion. And a difference of opinion would basically read that Allah commands you to do something. You fulfill it. You're not yet off the hook. You have to wait for external evidence. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will now tell you, look, you're now off the hook. You're now absolved. I was thinking about it in a particular manner. I have a child. I command the child to clean the kitchen. The child cleans the kitchen and then leaves. Then I summon the child back. I say to the child, where were you? He said, no, but you told me to clean the kitchen. I cleaned the kitchen. So he considers himself to be exonerated. I say, no, you only finish cleaning the kitchen when I say you have finished cleaning the kitchen. So that would basically be an example in terms of what certain of the scholars have considered. In other words, you're not exonerated when you fulfill the action with which you have been commanded. You are only exonerated once the legislator tells you that you are now exonerated, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. This particular difference of opinion reads as follows. So other scholars believe exoneration only occurs by an external address establishing the same, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. We are going to go with the majority of scholars in this particular regard that says if Allah commands you to do something, the moment you do it, it means now that you are absolved. What is the proof for that? The proof of the preferred opinion. What is the preferred opinion? Which is that the duty bound is absolved by actioning the command. What is the proof for this? The proof is that the default is exoneration, and that the command does not require more than actioning of the same. So basically, when Allah commands us to do something, the only requirement from me is to action the command. I don't need to action the command and then basically be in a state of limbo where I'm now waiting for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to exonerate me. No, when Allah tells me to do something, the moment I do it, I consider myself to be exonerated. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells me, commands me that I need to look after my family. I need to see to their maintenance. I need to see to their upkeep. I need to see to the fact that they have shelter, a roof over their heads. The moment I fulfill that obligation, then I am absolved. And part of the proof there would be what we refer to as bara'atul asliya, that the default is that a human being is not responsible for doing anything. What we refer to as the original acquittance, that by default, I don't have any duties and I don't have any obligations. So the moment a duty comes and I action that duty, then I fall back onto the default, and the default is original acquittance, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. We go on to the next issue now, which would be now the second part of our lesson. I think our lesson is divided into 3 parts, if I remember correctly. So the first part would be looking at ijza'ul amal. When you action something, are you exonerated? There's a difference of opinion, but the preferred view is that yes, you are exonerated. The next issue, which is going to be an important issue, would be that الذي يدخل والذي لا يدخل. It is the subheading of the next particular issue relating to the command verb. When Allah issues a command, who is included? In other words, who falls under the ambit of that particular command and who falls outside the ambit of that particular command? So when Allah issues a command, that command doesn't relate to everybody. Who does it relate to? Who is included and who is not included? So we'll take a moment just to look at the heading bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the heading reads as follows. So it says, my heading is who is included and who is not. That's basically just a translation for the heading in Arabic, which says الذي يدخل وما لا يدخل. Those who are included and those who are not included. You notice here that the word ma is used, but the word ma can be used to include man as well. So this heading refers to who is included in the address that renders a person morally responsible and who is not included. The intent is to distinguish the mukallaf from others. An example comes to mind now, and we're not going to look in terms of what the fiqh ruling is. But a lady finds herself in a state of menses. She's in a bleeding period. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you believe, kutiba alaykum as-siyamu kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum. Fasting has been prescribed upon you. Or rather, that verse has been abrogated. So the other verse which says, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم. Allah here categorically commands that whoever witnesses the month of Ramadan, what should they do? Yes, an command verb, فَلْيَصُمْ. Then he must fast it or she must fast it. So the lady in the menses, is she included in that particular address or is she not included? Our scholars say she's not included. I'm only mentioning that as an example so that we can get an idea basically that when Allah SWT has an address, that address doesn't necessarily include everybody. So the next issue what we're going to be looking at is So who is included and who is not included? Remember, we are not looking at specific terms, we are looking in general. So, for example, the Quran, it contains commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who is addressed by those commandments in a broad sense? So the text reads as follows. يدخل في أمر الله تعالى المؤمنون. المؤمنون. I have المؤمنين here, but it should be مؤمنون. يدخل في أمر الله تعالى المؤمنون. The believers are included amongst those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses with his commands. يدخل في أمر الله تعالى المؤمنون. That the believers are included amongst those whom Allah addresses with his commands. والساهي والمجنون والصبي غير داخلين في الخطاب. However, الساهي, the forgetful one, والمجنون, an insane person, والصبي, and a minor, غير داخلين, are not included. في الخطاب, in the address of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is very important for us to understand. Allah issues a command, there are many commandments. Some are included, some are not included. Who is included and who are not included? Our scholars say, and I'm going to repeat this for my own benefit first and foremost, يدخل في أمر الله تعالى المؤمنون. Muslims are included among those whom Allah Most High addresses with his commands. So the moment Allah is addressed, it reminds me of a statement of Ibn Mas'ud. He says that whenever we hear the statement, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, or you believe, then know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing you specifically. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing me, then my ears must prick up and I must be attentive in wanting to receive that command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu in terms of the Quran, Ibn Mas'ud says that it is Allah addressing you directly. And when Allah addresses you, He's speaking to you. So therefore your ears should prick up and you should be receptive to whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing you with. So here we're saying يَدْخُلُ فِي أَمْرِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى الْمُؤْمِنُونَ, that Muslims are included amongst those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses with his commands. But those who forget, as-sahi, wal-majnoon, the mad person, was-sabi, they are not included, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. The next issue we look at very quickly bi-idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be the application of the above. We're saying there's an address of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some people are included, some people are not included. Who did we say are included? The believers are included, but there's an exception, 3 exceptions. It is the child, it is the forgetful person, and it is the mad person. Now, the address of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of commands, it basically relates to 2 types of commands. The first type of commands relates to primary issues. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to you, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu aminu, believe. Fa'alam annahu la ilaha illahu, know that there is no God worthy of worship but Allah. So that's a command. Now that particular command relates to all and sundry, and there are no exceptions to that particular command. However, the command which relates to secondary issues, in broad terms, it relates to the believers, but there are exceptions. And the exceptions are those that we have mentioned in terms of a child, a mad person, and a forgetful person. So by way of example, in terms of my understanding, we have a forgetful person. This person, he can't lay a claim to the fact that, yes, there was an address of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala which told me to believe in none other than Allah, but I was unmindful of that particular address. That particular argument is not going to work, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. This is in at least as far as the text that I have in front of me is concerned, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So let's now look at those particular 3 categories of persons that are not addressed, are not included in the address of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it comes to the command. So the first person is the forgetful person. A person who forgets means he does not understand. So if he does not understand, how can he be considered to be duty bound? How can he be considered to be morally responsible? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Let's read through that part of the text. It reads as follows. Secondly, rulings relate to the physically mature believer of sound mind. The forgetful person is not addressed while in a state of forgetfulness, because since he finds himself in that particular state, he cannot understand the address. One of the conditions of address is that the addressee understands, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. What do we have? We have an objection in relation to the forgetful person, So, we have this well-known thing referred to as sajdatu sahu, the prostration of forgetfulness. That's exactly what it's called. So a person, he forgot, so he is in a sense duty bound to perform the prostration of forgetfulness. So what do we find here? The objection is that here's a person who forgot, but it appears that he finds himself morally responsible, duty-bound to perform the prostration of forgetfulness. So what is the answer to that? The answer is very simple. He's not being addressed while he's in a state of forgetfulness. After he recalls and he remembers, now in that state of remembrance, he's being told that you need to perform a prostration of forgetfulness for that which you had forgotten, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So let's look through that and read through what I've just explained to you now, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here we have an objection and a response. So what does the objection read like? It says, if a person raises the objection that forgetfulness prostration is legislated for the forgetful one, and therefore he is morally responsible. Likewise, a person that unmindfully destroys something is liable for it. The answer would be that it is not charging the forgetful one, rather commanding him to make up what he missed and remedy what he destroyed after the forgetfulness has elapsed. And if you look in the state where forgetfulness, a person forgets and he destroys something, or unmindful person destroys something, then he will be addressed to remedy that, not while he's in a state of forgetfulness, but after the forgetfulness has elapsed, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. The last issue which we're going to be discussing today, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is a very, very important issue, I think for all and sundry, and the scholars have differed tremendously around this particular issue. It is a point of contention. What are we talking about? The context that we're discussing would be that مَن يَدْخُلُ في خطاب الله ومن لا يدخل, who is included in the ambit of the address of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, when Allah makes a pronouncement, who's included and who's not included. We've already seen now that amongst the Muslims, there are the forgetful ones, there are the insane ones, there are the minor ones that are not included in the address of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we understand. The next issue which we look at now would be disbelievers. They also form part of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala issues a command in terms of Quran, are they included in terms of that particular address? In other words, are they considered to be morally responsible? And are they considered to be duty-bound? That is the question that we ask ourselves now. Let's look to the text bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It reads as follows. وَالْكُفَّارُ مُخَاطَبُونَ بِفُرُوءِ الشَّرِيعَةِ وَبِمَا لَا تَصِحُّ إِلَّا بِهِ وهو الإسلام لقوله تعالى حكاية عن الكفار ما سلككم في سقر قالوا لم نكن من المصلين. So disbelievers are addressed by Allah's commands بفروع الشريعة, to perform everything that is obligatory in sacred law. So the text that we have in front of us in terms of the Waraqat, what does it say? It says that the disbelievers are addressed by the secondary rulings of the Sharia. Number one, وَبِمَا لَا تَصِحُ إِلَّا بِهِ, and they are also addressed with doing that without which the secondary rulings would not be valid. The secondary rulings would not be valid. So in other words, they are commanded to perform the secondary rulings, and they are also commanded to accept Islam, because it is only by virtue of them accepting Islam that the actioning of the secondary rulings can be considered valid, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And as far as the Shafi'i school is concerned, what is the proof for this? The proof for this is the verse which was quoted, مَا سَلَكَكُمْ فِي سَقَرٍ. What caused you to enter into the hellfire? What did they respond by saying, لَمْ نَكُ مِنَ الْمُصَلِّينَ? We did not pray. In other words, we were duty bound, we were morally responsible to pray, but we did not pray. So what other than how should we understand this? Very importantly, so let's not commit ourselves to an understanding yet. Let's read through what the differences of opinion are first regarding this, and look at the arguments for and against, and in the process, inshallah, we'll develop an understanding in terms of what the scholars mean by that the disbelievers are morally responsible, and they are also addressed in relation or in as far as secondary rulings are concerned. So the difference of opinion reads as follows. Scholars differ on whether disbelievers are addressed with secondary rulings. The schools of thought are, number one, disbelievers are not addressed. This is an opinion held by certain scholars, and this view is attributed to the Hanafiya. So if you were to ask a Hanafi scholar that are the disbelievers, are they addressed with secondary rulings? The Hanafi are going to tell you no. The second group of scholars say that disbelievers are addressed. And this is the view attributed to the Shafi'iyya, as is clearly stated by Imam al-Haramain in what we have read of the Waraqat. And then thirdly, there's another opinion which says that disbelievers are addressed with the prohibition, not the commands. We continue with our reading, and the next issue we're going to be discussing would be Ibn Burhan's take of the statement. Ibn Burhan is going to look at the statement of Al-Kuffar Mukhatabuna bi Furu' al-Sharia, that disbelievers are addressed with the secondary commands. He's going to give us a particular understanding of the statement. What is that understanding? He says that there's a problem with this heading. In other words, he says, it is not valid for you to express this particular phenomenon as we have expressed it in the Waraqat. And what is that expression? Al-Kuffar Mukhatabuna bi Furu' al-Sharia. To make the statement that disbelievers are addressed by the secondary rulings. Why is that? This is because the statement disbelievers are addressed with secondary rulings gives the impression that the command to perform salah is directed at the disbeliever. So, in the beginning of our class, what did we say? We used the example of Aqim as-Salah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling me, Aqim as-Salah. I am a believer. So that particular address, it relates to me. So when I action the command which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me, in this instance, it is a command to pray. So I pray. Now when I receive the command and I pray, is my prayer valid? If all the conditions are met, then my prayer is valid. But if the same address were given to a disbeliever that pray, and he actions that particular command, then his prayer is not going to be valid, because one of the conditions for praying is that a person must be a believer. And therefore Ibn Burhan says that we cannot understand it in that particular light. How should we understand it? So let's just take a step back. Ibn Burhan says this particular statement is incorrect. Why? Because when you make the statement that disbelievers are addressed with the secondary rulings, it gives the impression that the command to perform salah is directed at the disbeliever, while in reality he is prohibited therefrom, and therefore it is not valid for him to be addressed with the command. So it is as if you are telling him that you must pray, but your prayer is invalid, and Allah knows best. So therefore Ibn Burhan therefore prefers to express the issue as it is permissible to address the disbelievers with that which makes secondary rulings applicable. So basically, in terms of his understanding, he is saying, and this is my understanding as well, and my preferred view in this particular regard, and that is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands a disbeliever with the secondary rulings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually commanding him to employ the means by which the secondary rulings become compulsory upon him. And what does that mean? That is for him to accept Islam. So all of these evidences, it's basically to indicate that there's a command which is a standing command. What is a standing command? The standing command is for you to accept Islam. The moment you accept Islam, now the secondary rulings kick in. So you are duty bound to adopt the means by which the secondary rulings become compulsory upon you, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And this is also furthermore my understanding that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands you to perform salah, then it implies a commandment for you to perform the ritual ablution, without which the prayer is not valid. So what is happening over there? What is happening there really is that the command to pray implies the command for you to perform the ritual ablution. So the command directed at disbelievers for them to follow through on secondary rulings can only be understood in reality as a command for them to adopt Islam, which is the means by which the secondary rulings become applicable, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. For further detail, we read through the following. Believers are not addressed. So those who believe that the disbelievers are not addressed, so we're going now to the Hanafi view. From the outset, the Hanafi say, look, that believers are not addressed. They argue that should the disbelievers be addressed, then this address happens before or after his Islam. So according to the Hanafis, they say that, look, if we were to accept that you are saying that a disbeliever, he is addressed by the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now we're going to have to apply ourselves, and we're going to have to think about this. Are you saying that this is before he becomes a Muslim? So before he becomes a Muslim, there's a consensus that a disbeliever is absolved of the secondary rulings. That's number one. If you're going to say that it happens after he's accepted Islam, then also there is a consensus. There's a consensus that whatever had happened before, that he need not make up for it. So let's look through the text there, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So being addressed before Islam is impossible, as worship is not valid from a disbeliever. I didn't mention that particular point. If you're saying that the disbeliever is addressed before Islam, then this is impossible. Why is it impossible? Because the worship is not valid from him. If you are saying that he is being addressed retrospectively, in other words, after he accepts Islam, he is not told that you were responsible for the secondary rulings. We also now have a valid consensus that he's not accountable for what he missed whilst he was in disbelief, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Here we look at the response to this particular view. The response to the view is unique in a sense for me, in terms of my understanding, that it's going to say that the kuffar are mukhatabun bi furu'i sharia, which doesn't mean that a kafir in practical terms, a disbeliever in practical terms, is actually responsible for praying by way of example. It's going to differ with that view, but the difference really is just in theory, as we're going to see now, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Both of these objections talk to other than the point of contention. So the matter of making up retrospectively is not applicable unanimously. So when the Hanafis tell us that, look, al-kuffar ghayr mukhatabin, that the disbelievers are not addressed, when the Hanafis say that the disbelievers are not addressed and they give their reasonings, we're going to respond to them. We're going to say to them, the matter of making up retrospectively is not applicable unanimously. We agree with you on that particular point, that when a disbeliever becomes a Muslim, looking back now in retrospect, we're not going to make him duty bound to make up all the prayers and whatever other secondary rulings would have applied to him. Why? Because there's a consensus that that is not the case. The same applies to the validity question while in a state of disbelief. So the Hanafis are telling us that it is not valid for you to make the disbeliever morally responsible, because what you're actually telling him is to pray, and then when he prays, you're telling him your prayer is not valid. We actually agree with you on both of those points, but that is not the point of contention. In other words, when we say al-kuffar mukhatabuna bi furu'i sharia, what are we actually saying? We as the Ash'ira, if you wanted to, or we as the Shafi'is, what are we saying? We are saying the following. The point of contention is not retrospectively and prospectively. The point of contention is whether a believer will be punished for omittance of secondary law, like he will be punished for not accepting Islam. That is the point of contention, because on all the other points we agree. Based on the above, this question is more suited to scholastic theology than Islamic legal theory. So the crux of the contention relates to the afterworld, not this world, and has no connection to secondary rulings, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And that is basically the view that Ibn Filkah expresses, and it's a view that bodes very well with me, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, that when we discuss the issue of are disbelievers morally responsible, we don't mean in a practical worldly sense, but rather we mean in an after-worldly sense, that will they be held responsible in the year after for that which they omitted of commands in this worldly sense? There's a difference of opinion. It doesn't apply to the worldly sphere, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And therefore Ibn Firqah, in terms of my understanding, very clearly and categorically says that this particular issue has got more to do with scholastic theology than what it has to do with fiqh, because fiqh is a practical application in our day-to-day lives. So this particular phenomenon doesn't have a practical application, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. That brings us to an end of our lesson today, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In our next lesson, we're still going to continue with the command, and the question we're going to be asking ourselves would be that a command to do something, is it a prohibition of the opposite? But till we meet again, jazakumullahu khairan. May Allah bless you and increase you in goodness. في أمان الله الكريم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.